add and subtract fractions with unlike denominators. So 3 of the big ideas before we get started with the steps. First, fractions must have common denominators in order to add or subtract them. So for example, 1/3 plus 1/2, we can't do it yet because the denominators are not the same.
This is why we did the lesson. 1 apple plus 2 apples is 3 apples. And when you have some apples and some bananas, you have to call them fruit, because we don't make banapples.
Second, you can make an exchange, or in other words, find an equivalent fraction in order to make a common denominator. So we can exchange the 1/3 for 2/6. We could see that model that with fraction blocks in the last video. And we can make an exchange of 1/2 to 3/6 because these are equivalent fractions and these are equivalent fractions. And now they're ready to add because the denominators match. And third, finding the least common multiple, or LCM, helps you know what exchange to make. We can practice and figure it out with pieces to see that we can change the 1/3 and the 1/2 into 6, but sometimes we don't have pieces in front of us, or sometimes we have fractions that we don't have a model for. So using the least common multiple will help you know what denominator you need to use. So let's go through the steps of using the least common multiple in order to add fractions, starting with this problem, 1/4 plus 2/3. The first step is to list several multiples of each denominator. So I'm going to list the multiples of 4, and that's just 4 times 1, 4 times 2. You might use your song to help you. 4, 8, 12, 16. We'll start with that many. Then I'm going to list the multiples of 3. 3, 6, 9, 12, 15.
Remember, when you're finding multiples, you were taught to use the M. So you list your 3 and you list your 4, 3, 6, 9, 12, 4, 8, 12. You'll still find the least common multiple. This way or her way works.
Step 2 is to find the least common multiple, or the smallest number that they both have in their list. So I'm going to start down here and look for anything that's the same. Oh, there it is. 12 is the least common multiple of 4 and 3. And I hope that you're already thinking that these steps sound a little bit familiar. We did this exact same thing as one of the methods to compare fractions when they were so close that we couldn't tell the difference. So these steps are really the same in order to make the denominators match. Step 3 is to rewrite both fractions so that the new denominator is the LCM that you just figured out. So we're going to make new fractions right beside it, with 12 being the denominator on both of them.
Remember, anytime you are renaming a fraction, you are using the identity property. You are multiplying by a form of 1, which means that the bottom number will change as well as the top number, but they will change at the same rate, which means they'll be equivalent fractions.
This is like making an exchange going from fourths to 12ths. Step 4, ask yourself, how did I get from that old denominator to the new, from the old denominator to the new one, and then do the same thing to the numerator. So let's do it with both of these fractions. How do I get from 4 to 12? Well, I'm going to multiply by 3 here, and I need to do the same thing to the top, to the numerator. So 1 times 3 is 3. So 1/4 is equivalent to 3/12. I need to do that step again. Sometimes I see people think if I did multiply by 3 here, I must multiply by 3 over here, but it's a different fraction because I need to do something different to get from 3 to 12. So 3 times 4 is 12, so I need to do the same thing to the top, times 4. 2 times 4 is 8, and the new numerator is 8. So now we have 3/12 plus 8/12, and I've rewritten that here. The last step is to add and then simplify your fractions. So remember, when you add fractions, you don't add the denominators. You keep the denominator the same, and you just add your numerators. 8 plus 3 is 11. So the answer to 1/4 plus 2/3 is 11/12. Let's go through a few practice problems to practice using the least common multiple. I have 3/10 plus 1/2. The first step is to write the multiples of both of your denominators. So I'll write a couple multiples of 10, 10, 20, 30, and now I'll write a few multiples of 2 as well. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10. Oh, I already see a multiple that matches. I see the least common multiple. It would be 10. Both of them have a 10 in their list. So the least common multiple is 10. Now that's going to become the denominator for both of my fractions. I think that you will find it helpful to, when you are doing these kinds of problems, to rewrite your problems vertically so that you can easily see the new problems that you're adding together. So I would suggest for a while we're first starting that you put them vertically on your paper to add them when you're rewriting them. So my denominator is going to be 10 for both of my fractions. Now you notice here that I don't have to make a change. My denominator is staying the same, so my numerator is staying the same. Or we could think about it like times 1 on the denominator and times 1 on the numerator. Here I say, how do I get from 2 to 10? Well, I multiply by 5 on the denominator, so I'm going to multiply by 5 on the numerator. 1 times 5 is 5, so 1/2 is equal to 5/10, and we knew that because 5 is half of 10. Now I can add my new fractions that have common denominators. 3/10 plus 5/10 is 8/10. And I need to remember, oh, I see two numbers that are both even. That was a reminder to me that I need to simplify. So I'm going to try dividing both by 2 because they're both even numbers and 2 is a common factor. 8 divided by 2 is 4. 10 divided by 2 is 5, and that fraction is simplified because 4 and 5 don't have any common factors other than 1. Now, I want you to realize that there's a shortcut, this is a free shortcut, that you can use if you want to. If one denominator is a factor of the other, so let's stop and see what that means. 2 is a factor of 10 because 2 times 5 is 10. So I have one denominator is a factor of the other. Then you'll only have to change the fraction with the smaller denominator. And we saw that happen here. I didn't have to change this one. I only had to change the one with the smaller denominator. So if you see a problem where one of the denominators is a factor of the other, realize that if you do find the least common multiple, you're only going to have to change one of the fractions. Let's try these same steps with subtraction. 5/7 minus 1/2. I'm going to find the multiples of 7 and the multiples of 2. 7 times 1 is 7. 7 times 2 is 14. 7 times 3 is 21. Let's go to the multiples of 2. 2, 4, 6, 8, 10, 12, 14. Oh, there we go. There's a multiple. A common multiple is 14. So the least common multiple of 7 and 2 is 14. That becomes my denominator for both. Notice that I've rewritten the problem vertically. 14 is my denominator for both fractions. Then I'm going to ask myself, how did I get from 7 to 14? Well, I did times 2 on the denominator, so I'm going to do times 2 on the numerator. 5 times 2 is 10, so 5/7 is equivalent to 10/14. Now to go and do the same steps on the bottom fraction. 2 times 7 is 14, so 1 times 7 will be 7. And notice again, we started with the 1/2 fraction, and we still have a 1/2 fraction. 7 is half of 14. Now I'm going to do 10/14 minus 7/14. 10 minus 7 is 3, and I'm going to keep the same denominator. So my answer to the original problem is 3/14. And you might be thinking, isn't this just like adding except for the very last step? And the answer is yes. When you are subtracting fractions with unlike denominators, it's the exact same thing as adding. Just when you get to the last step, make sure you subtract instead of add. Let's do one final subtraction problem. 8/9 minus 2/3. Now I hope that you're seeing that the shortcut maybe, that 3 is a factor of 9, because 3 times 3 is 9. So I can use the bigger denominator as the common denominator. This can stay my denominator for both of them. So this fraction doesn't have to change. And I can think, okay, well, I'm just going to change this one to ninths too, because 3 is a factor of 9. So I say, how do I get from 3 to 9? Well, I do times 3. I do times 3 on the numerator. 2 times 3 is 6. And now I just have to subtract. 8 minus 6 is 2. And I'm going to keep the same denominator, which is 9. So 8 ninths minus 2 thirds, the answer is 2. The difference is 2 ninths. One final little thought, that you might hear someone say the LCD, or least common denominator. Really, it's the same thing as the least common multiple. You are finding the least common denominator if you use the least common multiple. So realize that just like we have lots of names for simplifying fractions, these two things really mean the same thing.